Hello and welcome to the Yes Education Global Leadership Summit. Thank you for joining us. We're pleased to introduce Professor Deborah Ayer, founder of High Performance Learning. We hope that you enjoy this session, and I'll now hand over to Professor Deborah.
Hello, everybody. It's really good to have an opportunity to talk to you. This session, as you can see, is called How to Make Your School World Class by focusing on the learning sciences. And what I'm going to cover in our session today is the whole kind of business of why the learning sciences are important and why that shapes what it means to be world class now in a way that it didn't before. So just by way of introduction, I want to say that, that first of all, I'm the founder and chair of High Performance Learning. This kind of concept of high performance learning has been some 40 years in the making. So High Performance Learning Services, which is the company that I founded and work with, they're taking out into schools this idea which has been developed over a very long period of time. And I say that because there's a lot of initiatives out in the education space, some of which are very new, but which are not very well attested. But I think what is one of the strengths of high performance learning is it's very comprehensively research based, not just in my research, but also in the research of others. We've been around now for about 5 years, and high performance learning as a concept is really kind of catching on in the education space, particularly internationally. And we've got lots of schools now involved with us working in this kind of way, and it's proving very impactful. And I'll kind of talk a little bit more about that as we go through our session. I want to start with defining this idea of world class. What does it mean? And I guess what I want to say first is I think what is world class now and for the future is a little bit different from what we thought was being world class or exceptional as a school in the past. So even if your school is on various kinds of accreditation systems like inspection systems coming out at the absolute top, that's all based on a kind of an approach which is a bit historic, because all those things are still important, but we kind of now expect a little bit more. And the reason that we're expecting a little bit more is all about this. It's about the learning sciences. And the learning sciences are not just one single discipline, but there's a whole variety of disciplines coming together. But what's really interesting is that they're kind of all pointing in the same direction. So the research in all of these different kinds of areas are all beginning to demonstrate that there's some really key fundamental things that need to happen if we're going to learn effectively. And not only that, but if we do these things well, the proportion of us who could go on to be high performers is far, far more than we ever thought in the past. So most of us, in the past, when we started out in our careers, we probably in our training were taught about the bell curve, where a proportion of people will do well, most people will be in the middle, and some of them will struggle a bit. And we defined people by having certain forms of ability. That's really very 20th century thinking. And in the learning sciences, what's emerged is that we have the capability, most of us, to do well, but we need to unpack how to make that happen. So what I'm going to talk about today is some thoughts around that, and particularly about how high performance learning is a mechanism for doing that with you in your school. So in the new world, what it means to be world class, because we think that it's possible for far more people to perform highly, if you're going to put yourself in that top bracket, then you would really be expecting not just a small proportion of people to be getting top grades and doing well, but you'd actually be expecting almost everybody to be at that kind of level. So that's quite a big and significant change. But beyond that, not only are we looking in world-class schools for test passers, people who can sit the test and get a good grade, But we're also looking for people to have the sorts of values, attitudes, and attributes will mean that they're able to do well in university, in the workplace, and throughout their life. Because when you're educating students in school, you're not just preparing them for what's coming up in school, you're preparing them for life. And right now, we all know that you need to be, if you're going to thrive in the adult world, you need to be more resilient, more enterprising. You need to be able to figure things out for yourself. So you need to be quite independent of mindset. And you need to be tolerant. You need to be open-minded. We live in a very global world. And part of that means that we're seeing lots of diversity, not just in terms of people, but in terms of ways of doing things. And so we want our students to feel that even if things happen which are unfamiliar, and none of us have had a world that was more unfamiliar than the one that we've just been living in the last year, nonetheless, we want them to be able to, in unfamiliar circumstances, to be able to thrive. And then the final point here is that for a school to be world class, you have to deliver that every year, regardless of changing situation and circumstances. And one of the things that's marked out really world class schools this year is that they have switched into hybrid learning, remote learning, whatever you want to call it, without any loss in terms of their student progress. So they were faced with the unfamiliar, they figured it out, they found a way through, and they found some benefits, some drawbacks, but some benefits. So it's about being in that kind of mindset that develops in your students and in your school itself, which is all about, bring it on, whatever it is, we'll be able to find our way through it. So this kind of interest in the new world class, I think, has come particularly at the moment because of COVID, because having taken a big shift and disruption in our schooling and education, I think many people are now at just at the stage of thinking, look, we've got this opportunity to kind of build back in a different way, build back better. And so actually, many school leaders are taking this time to just pause, reflect, and think, okay, well, next year, what do we want education to be like, and how do we want it to be in the future? We're talking about becoming world class, and I guess one question you might be thinking in your head, or if I was there, you might be asking me as well, is this just for top schools? And the answer to that is no, this is for any ambitious school. You need to take your first steps on the journey. So whatever your performance level now, this is about mapping out the roadmap towards world class and then making progress towards it. Because if you're going to, in any part of life, if you're going to kind of aim for high levels of performance, you need to know what that looks like, and you need to work out how do we get from where we are now to that destination. So, in short, what I'm really talking about is how do we make our boat, our school, our institution, how do we make it go faster? And if we take what we know from the learning sciences, these are the three things that you really need to do in a nutshell. The first is you need to create a performance culture which really believes that it's possible for the vast majority of your students to do well in your school, regardless of how they're performing right now. Nonetheless, you need to convey that they have it within them to do well. You need to set that as the expectation. The second is you need a robust teaching and learning framework to make that happen, so that what goes on in classrooms every single day is reinforcing the kinds of thinking that you need in order to create high levels of performance. And thirdly, those things need to steer the entire life of the school. They can't be something separate, a bolt-on. They're just not something that we do at certain times, or some people do them and some people don't, or one part of the school does it, but not the whole of the school. If you want to make your boat go faster, everybody else everybody in the school, and I mean everybody, not just your teachers, but your support staff, the people who drive the buses, everybody. Everybody has to be behind the vision. And the vision is that we're going to do absolutely everything we can within this school to help every single one of our students become a high performer. So it's a whole school commitment that you need to make the most of the learning sciences. In high performance learning, what we've done is bring that together. We brought together what we know is important in terms of philosophy, alongside the framework, which is what we need to do to make it happen. And the framework for what we need to do to make it happen is really fundamental. It's all very well having a culture where you expect high levels of performance, and believe me, that's not an easy thing to establish within your school, to get that universally within your school. But that's just the backdrop. What you then need to do is to know, how do I build that performance in individual students? And every teacher needs to know it. And there's no one single quick fix way, but the learning sciences tell us how. So I want to start with the philosophy, the idea that everybody could be a potential high performer. And I guess what I'd say to you is this, that there are many changes that happen in education as we move through our careers. There are many changes if you're a school owner, if you're a leader of a school, if you're a senior leadership person within the school. You've seen many things come and go. But the single most important thing that's happened in the last half a century or so is our growing understanding of what humans are capable of doing. How do we know this? Why are we suddenly in a place where we're thinking differently, where we need to adjust to be more ambitious? Well, the most important area is definitely neuroscience. So neuroscience, in terms of the different disciplines, is the new kid on the block. But neuroscience is allowing us to actually see what happens in our brains. So when we put someone in an MRI scanner, we can see actually how neural pathways are created. And so this particular side is I think, an important one, which is to say that, we know that the brain structure and function is not fixed. It is, in fact, exquisitely plastic. So not just a little bit plastic, not just, well, I believe you've got a certain amount of potential and we could help you to enhance that potential. Potential, we don't know how much potential anybody's got, because however your brain is structured at the point at which you're born, you can develop new neural pathways and you can develop them very quickly. So whatever predispositions you've got, they're just the start. They're not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is what we do by way of building brains. And brains are built over time from the bottom up. So interestingly, from the point of view of those of us in education, there are probably a couple of particularly fertile times, one of which is in the early part of schooling in primary school, and where the brain is particularly adaptable. And as you can see on this slide, which is from the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard University, in the first few years of life, more than 1 million new neural path connections are formed every second. So every second. So in the course of a lesson, one single lesson in school, you can create new neural pathways and a significant number of them. So it's not a kind of, laborious, difficult thing to do. The brain in early part of our lives is really incredibly flexible and adaptable. And then secondly, when we get to adolescence is a golden period for learning, because it turns out from neuroscience that what actually happens in adolescence is that our brains go through a kind of bit of pruning, which enables more space to be made for new ideas to come into play. So during compulsory schooling years, we have got the two maximally effective times for building brains. So you might say, in a sort of in a gentle kind of way, that the job of the teacher or the educator now is to build brains. It's definitely to build brains. as well as to convey knowledge and all those other things that we've already known about. In psychology, different discipline, same thinking. So what we used to think in psychology was some people were born cleverer than others. What we now know is that anyone can be trained to be a high performer, and that it just takes a particular kind of deliberate practice, doing particular kinds of things over and over again. And what I'm talking to you about today is the kinds of things that you need to do cognitively in order to develop your brain. It's a more difficult journey for some than others, and it takes longer. But the reason why I've used the image of the driving test here is that it's something that most of us encounter. Most of us have taken a driving test. And for some of us, it was really easy. We took a few lessons, we did well, we passed the test. And for others, it was really difficult. And we had to have a lot of lessons, a lot of practice, and maybe more than one test. But the takeaway from this, which is critical to learning, is that it doesn't matter how long it takes you to get there, because that doesn't define, in this instance, how good a driver you're going to be in the long run. And that's the same with everything we do in school. And sometimes in school, in terms of learning, we've taken this kind of view that you have to get there at the right time. And if you don't get there at the right time, that's because you weren't good enough and it's never going to happen. What we now know is everybody, almost everybody, can get there. It just takes some people a bit longer and more practice. So we need to accommodate that in the way in which we think about this in school. So what I've really been talking to you about up until now is the fact that you should expect more, and that when you expect more, you should be seeing significantly larger numbers of students doing well. And the better you do this, the more that will improve year on year. How do you do it? You're all asking. Well, it's really quite a simple idea, although you need to work really robustly and systematically to make it happen. So first, to say that education quality is determined by these three things: what you teach, how you teach it, what you expect. I'm not going to talk about the what you teach. You can teach any curriculum you like. A teaching and learning framework sits alongside, is interdependent on the curriculum. So just any curriculum is fine. You choose your curriculum. A demanding curriculum is good, but it can be in any subject. It can be in any language. It's your curriculum. This is more about how you do the teaching and what is your level of expectation. And a teaching and learning framework is about creating the rigor, coherence, and consistency in how that occurs in your school. So it's not left to chance. You're not having some good teachers who are brilliant and some who are really not so good. What you're talking about is this happens in every single classroom. Of course, it will always happen better in the hands of a really good teacher. But what you're doing is reducing risk. Because even in the hands of a teacher that's not so good, they've got a kind of way of working and toolkit, which will mean that they get up to a good standard. So what you do, if you're going to put into place this kind of framework, is you just teach in exactly the same way as you've always done, but you also set out the expectations that you want to see, high levels expectation. So in the case of what we're talking about here, I would say that differentiation stops being some people do the hard work, some people do the middle work, and some people do the easy work, and they're in three different groups. And instead, everybody's doing the hard work, but we're putting in more support and structure to enable that to be accessible for those who need more support. And we're giving them more time to do it, more time to practice if they need it. We're providing a universal language so that we've got a language about teaching and learning, which means that we focus on the things that matter. And the things that matter are both the academics and the values and attitudes. So moving on then. In terms of success, this is what we know from research leads to success. You have to have some kind of potential. We used to think potential determined everything. Now we think it's the least important thing. You've got to have the right opportunities, the right support at the right time, and you have to be motivated. So motivation's the key to all of this. And you know, some people are more easily motivated than others. My colleague Liz Allen created this slide, and I like it very much. The dolphins are the ones who are always motivated. They're swimming out ahead. They're up for anything, want to do it. you have some dolphins in every classroom in your school, and you've got some dolphins amongst your teaching staff. You've got a lot more puppies. They would like to do it, but they're a bit unsure and they need a bit of help on how to do it, and they need to be reassured all of the time and encouraged to go further. Give it a go, have a try. I believe you can do it. You've got bears, they growl a lot. They're kind of, they don't really want you to help them, and they're quite protective of their own turf. But you have to kind of talk to them about why, even though they're doing something, they could maybe do it better. And then finally, the sloths. The sloths are always well-intentioned, but it never happens. And if you want them to do better, you have to talk to them about that is a repeat behavior, and they've got to learn to self-regulate so that they don't keep doing the same thing again and again. They're always the one that's late in with their homework. They're always the one that haven't done their planning properly. You have to help them to understand how to think about that before they begin. So the teaching and learning framework for high performance learning says these two things. It says you need students to be successful for everybody to be successful as a student. You have to learn how to think in sophisticated ways, but you also have to learn how to develop the learner behaviors that support that thinking. And the two are interdependent. One is no good without the other. They're like the double helix in DNA. And when we work with schools, part of the work that we're doing is about helping people to understand what these competencies are, but also embed them in their school. So the competencies are the two sorts: the advanced cognitive performance characteristics, the ways of thinking, and the values, attitudes, and attributes, which are the ways of behaving. And they're not entirely new and novel and unknown. But what I'm saying to you is you're probably doing some of this in your school already, but you're not necessarily doing it as comprehensively or as systematically or as deliberately or as purposefully as you need to do it. And that's what the change you need to see happen. Each of those categories that I just showed you have subsets between them. And all of those statements, some of which will be familiar to people and some of which a little less so, they've all got a research definition. So it's getting the best out of them. This is not the same as sort of brainstorming good ideas. It's actually very strongly research and evidence-based. So ways of thinking, ways of behaving, interdependent. You can go from novice to expert on any one of them. So high performance learning is a philosophy, it's a framework. We have an adoption process that helps you bring it in school, and we accredit schools who become high performance learning schools. And as you can see, the results are really impressive, because what you get is improvements in students' own well-being, self-esteem, appetite, confidence. You get improvements in your academic performance. But I haven't mentioned there the impact on staff. Staff love working in this kind of way. And 70% of them have indicated in our impact research that it's made their teaching more enjoyable. And because it makes their teaching more enjoyable, they're more likely to stay in your school. So it's a win-win. Schools choose HPL for lots of reasons, but these are amongst them. That it is holistic. It gives you a guiding principle, a way to work. You don't need lots of others. Why do it with us? If you want to introduce this kind of idea into your school, it's a simple sort of idea, but to get it as comprehensively and rigorously as you really need it, it's not necessarily that straightforward. And we've done it with lots of people, lots and lots of schools. We've got a way of doing it. Our adoption process means you'll win first time. So it's worth doing it with us, is all that I would say. So, and finally to say, as I draw to a close, that embedding something like high performance learning is about optimizing what you already do. So it's not about out with the old and in with the new. It's about saying, what can we learn from the learning sciences that helps us to optimize what we do in our school? And over time, it's a journey that's a long-term sustainable journey. So you'll see some quick wins, but basically you're looking over time. These are our contact details, and it's very easy to remember: www.highperformancelearning.co.uk. I'm going to finish my presentation in the final minute by just showing you some images of some of our high performance learning schools, what this looks like when it comes to life in a school, how it pervades every aspect of a school. And I very much hope as a result of this presentation that people who are listening are thinking, you know, what could the learning sciences do for us? That's what I'm aiming for. If you also think, you know, I'd like to take this really seriously and I'd like to talk to high performance learning, then we'd be absolutely delighted to hear from you for just an informal chat in the first instance to talk about all of this. So I'm just going to finish with a little series of images to show you what it looks like. So this is in a variety of schools. The one in the middle here is focusing on superheroes who take the values, attitudes and attributes and so that when the children talk about them, they can think about them in a way that relates to they're very easily memorable and they talk about their superheroes in terms of their behaviors. It's something that's pervasive in every subject, so PE, English, it's in the lesson planning, it's in the way in which you design tasks in school. You can see the same logos cropping up there where you're talking about focusing on particular ACPs and VAAs. You can see them again there. They become the lingua franca in your school. Teachers know about them, students know about them, their families know about them. It's the language for teaching and learning. It's in all aspects of what you do. And as I say, in all subjects. It makes students very much more able to talk themselves about what they're doing. So they're able to explain their learning and they can take particular competencies, like I use self-regulation to check my spelling and I use precision. So these are words that you're teaching them in the language. I used evolutionary and revolutionary thinking when I was doing this. So it's the language that you're instilling. You can instill it with very young children. Some people think, well, maybe it's only for older children, but I'm finishing with a couple of pieces from in the lockdown. And these are from 8-year-olds, and they're talking about how the values, attitudes and attributes, in their case, the VAAs, how that's helped them during lockdown learning when they've been learning remotely, and why it's helped them. So they're really genuine and authentic. And then finally, I want to finish on a positive note and say that learning for any child in any school should be demanding and challenging, but it also should be a whole lot of fun. And I think when people do high performance learning, one of the things that they do is teachers are massively creative and they are creative. And I think the whole kind of high performance learning approach and the learning sciences unleash the creativity in your teachers, and that's why they like it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Deborah. That was very informative. If anyone from the audience has any questions pertaining to the session, you can also connect with Professor Deborah through the networking system on the virtual event platform. We'd also love to hear from you. Feel free to share any thoughts or comments by sending an email to marketing@education.com. We'll be on social media as well during the summit, so if you want to chat to us there, follow us on Twitter @GuessEducation and use the hashtags and #GuessEducation. We hope that you enjoy the rest of the event. Thank you and bye-bye for now.